Oh, hello there. Yes, well, it's probably midweek, whatever that means. Yeah, it's one of those kind of cultural conventions things, isn't it? Yes, it starts, doesn't it? And then it's got a mid, and then it ends. Yeah. In a short cycle, I suppose. Yes, one of the ways that we do it. It's been going around for a long period of time. Other people invented it. We nicked it. Hooray! That's culture for you. That's the way it works. Anyway, we had a certain amount of that on display yesterday with my favourite culture warrior, or at least one of them, Rafe Hadelman-Koo, who got into a bit of a spat with a guy called Femi about Shakespeare, because that's still apparently a thing, even though it's not a thing. I think we've really established that. But yes, anyway, he got into a bit of a spat with GB News, but he wrote about it afterwards. And, link down below, you can have a look at some of the comments that people were saying afterwards. They wholeheartedly agree with him, including Carl Benjamin. Oh, indeed, how right he was. But it's worthwhile just unpacking exactly what he said, because it's one of those sorts of things whereby you just generically assert something without actually thinking about it. And Rafe, don't forget, is a historian, so he certainly knows what he's talking about, cough cough. So let's dive in. We must not be embarrassed to assert the primacy of Western civilization. Okay then, okay, fine. It depends on what you mean by Western civilization, though, doesn't it? Because, when people talk about the West and Western civilization, they just generally tend to mean it as a shorthand for modern times white people. I mean, at best, it's going to be Renaissance plus, isn't it? And, the Renaissance, of course, comes from, somewhere else, doesn't it? Because all of that, great knowledge from those definitely brilliant, very white people, the Greeks, for example, was kept alive by Islam for a long period of time, whilst, medieval Europe was kind of looked a bit like a Monty Python film. Yes, anyway, moving on. Africa didn't produce a Shakespeare because of its 2,000 languages. 80% of them have no written form. Okay then. I honestly don't really know what that means. I mean, Shakespeare was writing at a time when Shakespeare was writing, and various other people were writing similar things to Shakespeare. You might think Bacon, etc., because that was the culture at the time. Shakespeare wouldn't have written Shakespeare earlier than that, because that wasn't the culture that he was involved in. And if you go back a reasonable distance, certainly pre-Roman, you do end up with, awful lot of just, language-based and not particularly writing stuff. And if you go back far enough, you have to go back a long way, because we basically imported writing from those pesky Middle Eastern people. Yes, those damn Sumerians. God, I hate them. Coming over here with their writing, etc., etc. Yeah, Stuart Lee. You get the idea. Anyway, moving on. Asians play European classical music, hold Shakespeare festivals, and have national museums of Western art because they appreciate the depth and sophistication of European art forms. Okay then, but we do the same things here, don't we? If you go back, you think about, for example, all those artefacts in the British Museum. They were collections of cultures from the past. We've gone through various stages in this country of, for example, really going a great deal, a whole bundle, on the Romans, so you get your neoclassical styles, don't you? And you get, there's that whole kind of Gothic thing with the Normans, which was harking back, to the Italians or the Romans or something, yeah, all that lot. And of course, you get all of this other stuff as well. Think of the Mikado, think of Gilbert and Sullivan. Now, when they were doing that, it was the bee's knees to have, like in Japanese stuff. It was flavour of the month, and everyone thought it was absolutely brilliant because it was all new. And even in my lifetime, I can think back to WOMAD and the fact that suddenly people woke up to the fact that people in South America actually played music. My God, yes, some of them in South Africa as well, which led to things like, Graceland, the album. You get the idea, yeah? Because that's the way that culture works. It's cross-fertilises itself. But that got me thinking about whether or not there were Shakespeare societies in Africa. I might come on to that because, what Rafe is basically doing, because he had a black go against opposing him, in inverted commas, was basically saying, that white people are better than brown people. There's always the subtext here. So anyway, I looked this up. We've got Anne Sampson, historian, linking Africa's past with the present, the greater world. Anyway, link down below, as ever, yeah, historian Rafe doesn't actually look things up, just asserts things, because that's what historians do, naturally, yeah. He's written that famous historical book about quirky things of London, yeah, because, yeah, maybe not. Anyway, Anne, right, okay, link down below, you can read it for yourself, traces back Shakespeare societies in in various places in Africa about 100 years ago. Worthwhile just saying this, and it's not just South Africa where Shakespeare features. Alamin Missouri considered Shakespeare in Swahili back in 1996, while in 2019 there was a Shakespeare Youth Festival. Shakespeare in Africa as podcast by various people on the topic, while Nigeria seems to have explored some of the alternate ways of interpreting the man. You can also listen to some Hamlet and Yoruba. No doubt African countries have their links too, which Google et al. Will help you source. Yes, indeed, that whole thing about looking things up and, just knowing things, Rafe. Oh, that's me, isn't it? Not you, mate, is it? Anyway, let's try again. They do this whilst being justifiably proud of the maximum art, literature, and music of the Chinese, Japanese, and Indian civilization. Yes, indeed, you notice that he leaves vast swathes of people out there because Rafe doesn't like vast swathes of people, because even though Rafe, is Rafe, he seems to have this weird idea that anything that appeared in the world magically comes under the realm of Western civilization. It reminds me of another person like Paul Golding, who is undoubtedly one of your nutty fringe Nazis, but he actually had the audacity a few days ago to assert that the Greeks were definitely white people, and in fact they were Nordic, which is a way of torturing the language to such an extent I can't honestly believe. I mean, if you and I think Nordic, well, you should realistically think Scandinavian. And even at the best stretch, I think South Scandinavia land doesn't really include Athens. Still, again, it's historically inept because, of course, people move around. The ancient Greeks have been, over the years, mucked around with a lot. A bit like, that kind of whole melting pot thing you get. A bit like, all of those English people, very thoroughbred English people, like Rafe, inevitably. Well, not really like Rafe, obviously, because he's not. He's just that. And Rafe is that character from, actually played by a black-top actor, Paul Mason, I think it was, in Ain't Half Hot Man, who is always asserting the supremacy of his Britishness against the other coolies that realistically don't quite understand things, although the subtlety in that programme, of course, is that the other Indian character is actually very, very sussed. Still, can't have that, eh? Can't have that. Anyway, moving on from that, this is what the anti-British ideologues, me presumably, who dominate our own cultural institutions, cannot or will not grasp. Yes, you see, there are certain cultures that are very good. Shakespeare et al., brilliant, okay. Other white people from presumably a mythical past, I don't know, let's think of Moby Dick at the latest, or maybe The Great Gatsby, yeah, but no further than that. And then you get the sort of classical stuff, which is really, really good, but it only belongs to certain civilizations, yeah? You can read The Art of War if you like, but you're not going to go any further than that, and you can maybe appreciate a Ming vase, but you cannot appreciate a people from elsewhere that are considered too inferior. Yes, they cannot stand that an Englishman is the greatest writer the world has ever produced. Well, yeah, maybe not, I don't know. But again, it's like arguing about the greatest album ever, isn't it? It's a meaningless concept that Rafe here embraces fully because, of course, Rafe doesn't like the idea that other cultures have their own values. It sticks in their craw. They will do anything to diminish and downplay that achievement. But the thing that Rafe is doing here, which no historian should ever do, is, of course, taking everything out of context, because all art has a context, doesn't it? Yes. Think about the futurists, forever associated with the fascists, right? Think about postmodernism, forever associated with various schools of other philosophical thought. Yes, the French and some of them pesky Germans that we're supposed to believe are all plotting against us, or certainly they were back in the day. After all, they couldn't win through communism, so they've tried it through other means. All of that stuff. But this is just meaningless tosh on his behalf, isn't it? It's meaningless tosh. Because, yes, Shakespeare did write when he wrote. But how come Western civilization was so lacking before that? And how come other civilizations were so blindingly brilliant, for a start? And, if we nicked agriculture and writing from people that were very distinctly much browner than us, does that mean that we're inferior to them? I don't know. Yeah? Again, the Renaissance would not have happened without the sudden rebirth of ancient wisdom, which was Greek, Nordic people, or not, in case, yeah? You notice, for example, that with loads of these cultures, they become Western when it's convenient. It's a bit like Judeo-Christian. It becomes convenient at various times. Yes, Judeo-Christian is a phrase that's only realistically cropped up since 1945. Before that, it was Christian culture. These days, we have to draw a line and circle around things because some people are good, like me and Rafe wants to be, and other people are just bad, like, Femi on GB News. He must be wrong. Just look at him. Yes, inferior cultures. Okay then, if you like. Anyway, final thing, just before we move on, or I move on, probably got to go and do some work. Work. Oh, awful. If only I had a better Protestant work ethic. Anyway, yes, blindingly good news that Kemi Badenoch has decided, having taken a large amount of money that from fossil fuel lobbies, that net zero is a really, really bad idea. A brilliant article down below from Byline Times pointing this out. She's all over the place at the moment. And also Andrea Jenkins, standing for reform, who's done exactly the same, who managed to brilliantly at the weekend argue against solar farms whilst conveniently forgetting and unfortunately not completely wiping out her social media history of her having a plaque put up having opened the very solar farm that she was protesting in front of. You cannot make this stuff up. Yes, these people will do anything for money, which makes me think that what we need to do is have a whip round, and if we can raise £1 million, I reckon we could probably give it to Kemi and she'll come out with a radical, anarchic future proposals for all of us. It'll be money well spent. She'll be happy, we'll be happy. Yeah, what could go wrong? Nothing at all, because let's face it, anarchism makes sense. It's a great example of Western civilization, eh, Ralph? Oh, most definitely. Not that, maybe. Anyway, do have a glorious midweek. Enjoy your own culture. Maybe enjoy other people's cultures. Why not? Why not just accept that we're all basically human? I share a small percentage of DNA with Rafe, but I'm not going to say that somehow that makes me better. It makes us the same. And that, perhaps, is realistically the big issue.